all right, let's just take a quick look at the culture around us, the state of psychology of everybody. Oh, it's a mess. Oh, we're all hugely traumatized. Oh, we don't understand each other. Okay, let's fix these things. Maybe instead of fighting each other and pointing the fingers, you're not doing this, men aren't doing this, women aren't doing this. That's all pointless. That's tribalism. It's a culture war. Let's take a therapeutic perspective. Let's all try and improve, get better. And then everyone might just suddenly chill out and be a lot happier. And then we can all partner up and have children and live in utopia.
Be happy.
Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome to the Emily and Todd Podcast.
Emily and I had a pretty interesting conversation. We obviously want your perspective, but kind of what do you feel is the man's biggest fear when it comes to relationships?
It's not sexual monogamy. I made a video on my channel, got a lot of pushback when I was sort of exaggerating, although that is a factor. My audience told me absolutely unequivocally what their biggest fear is. So I feel like I know the answer to this one, and it's that they're going to get duped. They're going to get fooled. A lot of men worry about investing their best years, having children, merging finances, and then their woman's going to break up with them. They don't necessarily trust that a woman is going to be loyal or committed or stable. Now, this is coming from men who've largely been burned in the past, who thought that everything was good in their relationship, who perhaps felt like their personal sacrifices and their contributions weren't valued by the woman and that they were eaten up and chewed out. And it's a sufficiently common experience, and there's enough horror stories going around that you've actually got a segment of the male population who is frightened of commitment, not because of the sort of historical stereotype that you see played out in sitcoms and things like that. Like, I don't want to commit because then I can't sleep with other women. No, the more common reason nowadays is I don't want to commit because I don't trust that she's going to be fully committed. It doesn't seem like women have that same sense of loyalty anymore. I'm worried she's always looking over her shoulder for the next better deal. I'm worried about her runaway hypergamy. I'm worried that if I ever show a bit of vulnerability, she's going to be angry at me for not being a stereotype, man's man. And when they have so much to lose, it makes sense why they're so scared, because it's a little bit better here in Australia. I'll probably get some pushback on that from guys who've suffered in the Australian system, but from the horror stories I hear about your country with your alimony laws and your divorce laws and your child custody laws, my God, it's disgraceful. It's like a human rights violation every single day what happens to fathers in your country. It makes me very emotional to think about, actually. And I think there's a lot of men who are just like, I'm not sure I can risk that. I think all fathers who are listening to this, I do get emotional. I'm a father now, but I think they can understand what I'm talking about. That pain, that risk of potentially giving over so much control over your money, your life, your happiness, your children to a woman when they don't necessarily trust the morality collectively of femininity. It can be too frightening. So I think that's the biggest fear that they have.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've seen also, especially in the comment section of many of my videos. It's men telling their own stories of going through it, being married for 21 years and losing everything to her and assuming or feeling like everything was okay. But then she tells him, oh no, I've been unhappy for 10 of the 21 years, and it's such a betrayal. I've heard too of men that absolutely lose everything when the child is young. And even if they have 50-50 custody, they're paying a crazy amount in child support, even though their ex-wife is living with another man, and getting plenty of support, in that direction. It is heartbreaking for me to hear that. And then the younger generation of men are also hearing these stories. Yeah. And they are saying, many of them are saying, marriage is not worth it. Mm-hmm. It's just too risky for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it frightens them. And that's obviously a baby with a bathwater situation. I'd love to hear from Todd on how can we validate those fears in men as they are real, but they're not, allow them to just be like, okay, well then the solution is to just run away from women forever.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to start by saying that I honestly think that paternity fraud is probably the thing that men fear the most, because I think that nowadays, especially with the advent of social media and things like that, women have so much opportunity to go stray from a relationship and to have a child with somebody and then realize that that child is not yours, then that's even adding an extra layer onto all the things that you just talked about, as far as the divorce courts and the breaking of relationship, because then you're forming a relationship with this child who you think is yours, and then you have no rights over that child if it ends up coming up. And I think that's something that is just terrifying to a lot of men, whether they're kind of in touch with that or not. But just to and Emily and I were discussing this too, is that we think that there should be DNA testing upon every birth, just because right now it's something that like Emily was saying, like the woman just puts down the father on the birth certificate.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever thought of that idea, Alexander. I don't even know if that has been proposed ever.
I've advocated for years it should be mandatory.
Okay.
Every single child. I can see no logical reason against it, and I'll go even further. Any woman who objects to it is a sexist.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I agree. It's such a simple test. Like, I don't understand why it hasn't been enacted.
Absolutely.
No, it's disgraceful. Look, there is a disgusting current of morality which doesn't really view children as the property of the father. They view it as the property of the mother. As a default, like the idea of men's visitation to their own children is disgusting and offensive, and you see women break up with their partners and then are suddenly shocked that he should want to see their children or that he should have any kind of right, even though she has every right to his money. 50-50 custody should always be the default, and then there should have to be extraordinary circumstances in order to change that. I'll go again. Any woman who objects to that is a fucking sexist. I have no time for it whatsoever.
Well,
I've tried listening to the arguments against it as to, but women are better, and la, 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 la. I found no credibility in any of it. And I find that there's a female superiority, and it's worse than that. It's not just like a pro-female thing. It's an anti-male thing. There's a really sexist undercurrent against men, and there's an unwillingness to actually experience what that might be like for a man to not see his child. And it ties into my greater fears about female lack of empathy for men that I find so worrying and troubling, and genuinely gives me panic when I think about it.
I would go as far as to say is they are not good moms, because they know that their child needs their father just as much as they need them. That's my belief, my personal belief, and that's what I've lived by. I get somewhat triggered when I hear stories of single dads that are not getting time with their children, and it's because the mom is actively engaged in keeping them away. Because for me, I feel like I have even sacrificed, because I'm a divorcee, I have 2 kids, and I have sacrificed so much time with my kids, just spontaneously, like almost just giving them to him, because I know that they need time with him, So even if it's an inconvenience to me, I'm going to make sure that I'll do whatever I need to in order for them to have a solid relationship with their dad. So it blows my mind that some women don't think that way for their kids.
And unfortunately, I think that you're more the exception than the rule.
I just don't.
Out there.
Yeah, I don't understand with like all the knowledge that we have about childhood development that's just not more common.
Well, I think it goes back to education, but also the fact that it becomes a power struggle.
Yeah.
And the courts and everybody else kind of supports that. And there's also this generalization that men cannot take care of children on their own at the same level as women can. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's definitely a case-by-case basis, because I think there's a lot of great dads out there, and there's a lot of women that are mothers that probably shouldn't have been mothers in the first place.
Yeah.
So, Alexander, I'd like to kick that question that we talked about as far as the percentage of people in healthy relationships. What do you think as far as because I'm really interested in your perspective on this, as far as what do you think the percentages of people who are actually have the capability of being healthy parents?
Yeah,
Were you going,
5. I don't.
even
it's
going
the
lower than?
Same. No.
Okay.
No, I think if you're able to have a healthy relationship with another human being, you're
Okay.
capable of being a healthy parent.
Okay.
I could even possibly say for the first 12 years, you're probably capable, the percentages may be higher for parents, you're capable of being a good parent up until the point when your child needs to individuate. Some parents are quite good at meeting their children's needs for the first little while because the child worships them, the parent is the hero, and there's not really any kind of threatening sort of individuality. And then once the puberty hormones kick in and the child needs to differentiate themselves and start to rebel, it's a very normal process of growing up, and it's something that's actually quite easy to facilitate as long as your own ego doesn't get in the way. At that point, a lot of parents start to struggle, and then they start to feel like, oh, this child is just abandoning me in the same way that I was abandoned as a child, or they're trying to control me with all of their demands the same way that my parents controlled me or my abusive ex-husband controlled me or whatever. So I'd say maybe 10% of parents are capable of doing a good job for the first, 12 years, and then maybe 5% overall.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I just look at my own, I have had a lot of conversations with my mother about how my dad was a really good dad when I was really young. But then once I, got older, then he wasn't able to meet my needs and, be there for me like I needed. And it's something that I don't think that I'm alone in this. I think it's probably fairly common.
But the good news is that if you do the work on yourself, like if you go to, you see someone like Todd, you see a psychologist, you go through some therapy, you heal your trauma, and you become a well-adjusted individual, you'll find romantic relationships are now easy. You'll find parenting easy. I mean, not easy to that extent, but you'll almost find it enjoyable because oh, great, another opportunity for me to learn about myself, to learn about other people. It becomes your new default source of dopamine or serotonin, whatever the pleasure chemical is in your brain. Like your capacity to connect to people is suddenly not a source of pain, it's a source of pleasure. And so it just sort of goes off like a rocket ship. And that's why I gave the figure 5% straight away, because if you're a healthy individual, you're going to be able to do all of these relationships fine. That's not necessarily anything that's going to be too different. And it tends to be, of course, the people who are in healthy relationships tend to have healthy bonds with their children. That's quite obvious and predictable, I would say.
It's sort of like parents healing their trauma, right? So that they're not triggered by their children.
Yes.
I think, if you want to be a good parent, look at yourself first, heal yourself.
Yes, for sure.
What do you think, talking about kids, do you think, some couples decide not to have children? What do you think about that? Because that kind of goes against biology, right? It's sort of natural for us to want to reproduce, at least equal to ourselves. So, 2 parents having 2 children. But there are a lot of couples, I've known them personally, that have decided from a very young age not to, even when they're capable of. It's really just a choice that they make.
There's a weird self-imposed ignorance from people who think that having no children is a perfectly natural and legitimate choice. Now, let's look at some of the figures. 80% of women throughout history have reproduced, 40% of men have. But in terms of that actual individual, do they understand that every single one of their ancestors, and I don't mean human ancestors, I mean every single one of their ancestors back to when we were amoeba floating around in the primordial soup, reproduced without exception. If that was not true, they would not be here today. And so for them to suddenly say like, oh, I'm not going to reproduce, I don't have that instinct, it's just, it's a lifestyle choice, whatever. They don't understand the biological significance of that. So much of what guides biology, watch any David Attenborough, is geared towards the reproduction, the passing on of your genes. So it's not a small thing. And I wish that people would be more curious about that. Like, gosh, do they realize what a massive deviation it is? Because even though not every human reproduced, they all wanted to. That was always the goal. It's just that they failed, or for some reason they're infertile, or whatever it might be. So if you don't have that instinct or that desire to reproduce, at least have the curiosity or the self-awareness to be like, what's going on? What's going on for me that I don't have that instinct? Surely you'd be curious about that. Now, the truth is, there is an argument to be made, I think, that the capacity to overcome your instincts could be painted as though you're more high quality, right? Like, so if we have instincts that tell us to gorge on sugar and fat, or to indulge in violence whenever we're angry, we look at somebody who's able to show some self-control and not indulge those things, and we're like, that makes them a more high quality individual. But I think when you take it to the extent of I don't want to have children, you can't necessarily make that same case. So you look, okay, so why doesn't this person want to have children? Well, it often has to do with survival, right? Like, if you don't think that you're going to be able to raise children in a healthy way, or that your lifestyle isn't going to be able to facilitate enough time with children, or that they're going to be not enhancing your survival, but actually inhibiting it, then it does make sense from that perspective. It's quite rational to not have children, because obviously your first primary instinct is to make sure that you survive, because your genes already live inside you. So if you're like, if I have 5 children, I'm not going to have any food for myself. I'm not going to be able to provide for myself. That makes sense. But what I would say is that too many people are taking their default circumstances and then claiming that that's normal, and then all the things that spring on from that must just naturally be derived. Because I work 9 to 5 and I'm really, really stressed, obviously I don't have time for children, and that's a completely normal thing. Well, actually, scale that back a few paradigms. Why are you working so much? Do you need to have 2 cars? Do you need to have a holiday house? Do you need to have a boat? Do you need to live in an expensive city? Could you go buy a cabin in the woods somewhere? Like, do you need to live with as much stress as you are? And once you're there, what tends to happen is like, I'm thriving. My survival is guaranteed. I've got more than enough money, more than enough free time. You know what? I'm going to be greedy. Now I want my genes to have an even better chance of surviving. I'm going to have some children. So what I would like to see is just generally everybody just relax. Stop working so hard. Stop getting caught up in the materialism and the consumerism and the endless, mindless capitalism. I'm not anti-capitalist. I'm just saying, like, that endless machine that tells you that you're not enough, that you need more and more and more. Scale it back to actually think what is actually important in life. You know, it's small moments, it's connection with other human beings. And when you shrink your life back, I think that desire to have children is more naturally going to arise in people. So when I find a woman that says to me, or a man, I'm not interested in having children, I don't at all interpret that as there's something unique in their biology or there's something inherent in them. I know who they are biologically. They're an organism like every other species on the planet that wants to reproduce. I think there's something in your circumstances, either some personal trauma going on for you psychologically that means you're not capable of doing it, or you're fine to do it, but your lifestyle is constructed in such a way that you can't make that happen. And what I tend to discover is that as people get older, you know, they can get very defensive about their decisions to not have children, but actually there's a lot of people who regret waiting so long before they tried or anything like that. You know, life is long. In your old age, it's going to be hugely enhanced by children coming to see you, like in your old folks' home or whatever like that. There's so much joy to be derived from the process of parenting, and we don't have a culture that currently glorifies parenthood in the way that it should. That really should be our top priority, is to facilitate the healthy raising of children. But we don't have that. We have making money as the top priority, and a lot of people are getting caught up in that, and they're going to be miserable later on because they were kind of lied to, essentially. That's my long monologue answer. Thank you, guys. You never interrupt me. You just let me go.
I love listening to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I do too.
I love listening to that because I believe that too, that people are just working too hard, especially in the U.S. It's that consumerism. And I think there are going to be a lot of regrets as they age, you know, and they haven't really stayed close to family. Another example of that is that families are not staying close together. You know, they're moving around the country.
Yes.
And so there's not that support system. And I see it for women, too, that have focused on their careers. You know, they'll even say it. You know, I can have babies when I'm closer to 40. You know, there's technology now. Or I'm going to freeze my eggs. But it's... And I get it, like, it's a hard decision because to some degree I did, you know, when I was in school, you know, getting my doctorates, obviously, like, I probably would have had children when I was younger than what I did. I was 29 when I had my first, but I probably would have if I wasn't in school, you know, and I didn't have the time. And I wanted to focus on getting a career first. But I think that some women now, it's like, it's just even more extended because now they're coming out with debt and now they have to work 10 years. They want to pay off the debt from college before they have a child because then there's a whole bunch of other expenses and maybe they won't be able to work. You know, they'd rather stay home. So there's just so much to it that I think is driven in our society.
I hear you. And I have a little bit different take because it's something that, if we go back to that 5% number, I think that some people have the self-awareness that they don't have what it takes, psychologically, emotionally, to be good parents. And because of that, or they grew up in a household that was very abusive, and, they've decided that, this is just something that would be too much and I wouldn't be a good parent. And also, kind of bringing a child into a world with so much peril. I think that within a certain demographic, I think some people have decided that their quality of life would be better if I totally agree with you as far as long term, but kind of in a short term sense, as far as saying, okay, I just really don't have what it takes to be a good parent. And I think honestly, if more people were in touch with themselves and they realize that, then there wouldn't be, as much divorce or children that are being raised by people who are incapable of doing that in a healthy manner. And then the cycle just continues, right? So
I agree with so much of that, and that unhealthy people shouldn't be having children, but I'd still place the blame mostly on circumstances. I think there's a lot of people who are not considering changing their circumstances or their lifestyle who are incapable of being parents, but the issue is environmental. It's not necessarily intrinsic. Those same individuals, if you put them in a culture that valued parenthood and didn't value money so much, they might actually have the time and space to work on themselves or whatever psychological issues they have that would inhibit their parenting ability.
Mm-hmm. Sure. But realistically, is that going to change anytime soon? That's the big question. And I would say no.
I mean, you might have more insight into this because you actually have your psychology practice. I mean, one of the limits, I think, for Emily and I, in terms of gathering data, is that on our social media pages, we have an audience of people who have specifically sought out that content, but it does give you a slightly biased perspective. And that actually, it's one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you, Todd, is because you have access to a data pool at a very intimate setting that's not specifically related to dating. These people might not have come to you specifically because of an expertise you have in dating and relationships. So obviously, without breaking confidentiality, as you look over your personal private practice, what do you sense people's capacity for changes with regards to overcoming these issues that inhibit their ability as partners or as parents? And what are the issues that men and women are largely bringing to you when it comes to this stuff?
Were you speaking more kind of within individuals or more within couples counseling?
I was thinking individuals, but now I'm really interested in the couples. But again, I think the couples is a slightly skewed data demographic because these are people who have recognized that they've got sort of kind of an issue. But I am curious about just general individuals coming to you. How much are they focusing on dating and relationships? Is that a big concern for them, or has that just become culturally not as important anymore as it used to be?
Oh, I definitely think it's important for them. I mean, whether it's a guy who's in an unhealthy or unhappy marriage, or it's a lot of the younger guys that I work with, are just completely out of the dating market because of the way it is right now, and because of that, there's a lot of guys that I've worked with that have gotten to the point of being suicidal because of the fact that they're just invisible to women. And it's something that, creates a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and it's something that they just don't feel like, no matter what they do, that they're able to really connect. And that's something that, I think is just so important to a heterosexual man, is having a connection with a woman. And when that's absent from their life, that's where I think you're starting to see a lot more violence. School shootings, things of this nature. I know that, that's, I'm not blaming that on mental health, but it's more about, guys who are essentially incels that, are suffering in silence, and they don't have anybody to really talk to about that. And so, it just breaks my heart when they come in and they say, and I go on dating apps, I get no matches, and I don't have any warm environments that I can go to that women are there. And so I think that's something that, especially again for younger guys, but I would even say guys who are older, like myself, that, maybe had been in marriages and now are back into the dating world, and, kind of navigating how tough it is right now. That and just to be honest, this is, kind of outside of what we've been talking about, but it does connect as far as having, really stressful jobs and, just trying to make ends meet, and then trying to then navigate a dating world when you're working 50, 60 hours a week because you have 2 jobs, just because, you can't survive. So I think it's a huge problem, and it's something that, I think the manosphere is trying to address. But, I think, kind of when we spoke before, Alexander, that, you said that, that in the manosphere, there's just so much kind of toxic advice that's given, and it ends up not being very helpful. So what would you say to young guys who are struggling with dating and connecting with women? Kind of what are some of the solutions you would have? I mean, we're both friends.
Watch my channel.
Yeah, watch your channel. But we're both friends with Wheat Waffles, but I'm not sure that he would say move to Southeast Asia, get surgery, really dramatic things. But that's how his incredibly smart brain works. But I'm wondering, besides watching your channel, what are some strategies that you think men could use so they could help them out with that?
I'm such an annoying guest in this instance, but it's such a big question, and there are so many things that men need to do that I actually wasn't being tongue-in-cheek. It's just that, on my channel, I've got 500 plus videos now of different techniques that men could do in order to do it, that I could just name any number of different one of things, but there's so much that guys need to do. So without being very specific about it, I can't give you that. I was just sort of waiting, I suppose, for you to answer, because I'm so curious to ask you, Todd, like, you just mentioned like a lot of heartbreaking issues that guys are facing with dating. With your female clients, are they coming in complaining about dating problems, or is this just an exclusively thing that men are bringing to you?
No, they are too, but again, I think it goes back to kind of, if you look at, most people are meeting through dating apps nowadays. The percentage is very high. It's more than any other place. And, again, so they're really connecting with that, that top 10, 15% of men who then are not giving them the relationships. And so they are then, these are a lot of times great women who have a lot to offer, but it's something that, if they go on and they have the choice, of course, from a woman's perspective, she's going to try to get the highest quality man that she can. But unfortunately on dating apps, that really, goes to looks a lot of times. And, so they set their settings for these, small percentage of guys that then are in a position to really, wreak havoc on the dating world. And so a lot of women feel used, and it's something that then, they see all men as being that top percent of men that they're connecting with, when the reality is that there's a lot of great men that are invisible to them.
It's such a different problem, isn't it? Like, you're talking about women being visible in a way that they potentially don't want to be visible, they kind of, but the men, it's a complete different feeling of just being ignored, like not even really getting to be able to participate in the game. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted to kick the question over to Emily as a sort of empathy kind of exercise, because from my experience, women are not able to understand what that's like as a man. I call it a uniquely male experience, and I've never really had a woman thrilled with me for saying that, for all the reasons that we've talked about before. But I stand by it, because from my perspective, women don't know what it's like to be invisible. They can't. They are always got value, especially young women who are still of childbearing age. And so they face a huge number of problems in the dating market. I've spoken about them at length on my channel. But this one about no women are even looking at me, I don't know how to even get started. I feel like I must be the ugliest person on the planet. I'm so horny. I'm so desperate for emotional connection. I have so much desire for intimacy, and yet women are not facing my direction. They're not considering me in that. women might have the problem of too many guys are trying to hit me up for sex, but that's a uniquely different problem. So I'm curious, Emily, from your perspective, do you feel like you could imagine what it's like as a man?
Oh, I feel like that's always dangerous territory. I mean, I think that I can step into their shoes, essentially. But, like, I don't ever like saying, if I am not a man, to say that, like, I know or I would know how that feels. Because I have not experienced anything like that myself, obviously. But to just not be seen, I have heard that from, like, some women that are, let's say, extremely overweight, obese. Like, I've actually seen them make content of saying that they feel unseen by men because of their weight. But I'm wondering what the difference might be, right? Because men, it feels like it impacts them quite a bit, to not be seen on an individual basis. And I think that there might be an impact from culture and society, right? So even women that are very overweight or could be considered unattractive, they get a lot of positive feedback from the world right now, right? With body positivity.
Yeah, especially other women.
Yeah, like women are, bumping up their egos, pumping them up because every woman is beautiful in some way, right? And men don't have that at all. So I'm wondering if that's sort of the missing piece, because it's hard to solve the problem of it being on an individual basis. Like, how do you tell women you need to see the men in your life other than women that are already in their lives, right? Like their mother or sisters or friends, I think they probably have a great impact, just as fathers have a huge impact on their daughters. So I'm wondering if some of it can stem from that for the guys that really get into depressed states, and really are going through a really tough time, especially with suicidal thoughts. So after talking about all this, I just think of the differences being potentially more the culture that's driving the difference.
Emily, though, did you, prior to starting your TikTok channel, did you have any idea that this was kind of going on, that there was this huge group of men that are just kind of outside?
No.
Yeah. And so, you're very, very intelligent and, connected. But it's something that, again, I just think that if you're not dealing with it, then it's not something that you see. Yeah.
I think there's been more suicide awareness. And I think, that brought about my awareness of, more men having issues, but not necessarily related to dating. More of the depressed states. But it wasn't until I got on TikTok and really listened. So I think that if women just listen more and were open to it, like we were talking about earlier about some of the other topics, that, they kind of can have some empathy and understand that men think differently than them, I think that would go a long ways.
Yeah. Well, and have very different struggles, know. So, versus, we keep hearing about the patriarchy, but it's, something that there is a patriarchy, but it affects men just as much as women,
right?
Or worse in some cases,
right?
Do you know what I mean? Just because a man is in the government, for example, doesn't have nothing to do with the guy who works construction,
right?
Do you know what I mean? And who may be not an attractive guy, and nowadays the dating apps and all the social media and so on and so forth, there's just so many guys that are invisible. And I think it's just, that's why you are such an ally, because you're able to kind of, pump up men and speak for them. It's unfortunate, though, that your audience is all men, because it's something that, if we could reach more women, then, because I think, generally speaking, if women were aware of this issue, then I think a lot of women are really kind, nurturing people that would be understanding.
What's tough is that nothing's motivating them, at least right away, right? Like, the motivation would be to have a healthy relationship with the man that they choose, but that's so far down the line that there's nothing immediate that is motivating them to have an understanding of men because they have plenty of options. They're dating and, they can just complain, really, rather than...
Yeah, it's their luxury that they're afforded, yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
By being in the demand one. I certainly push back on Todd's idea that the problem here is ignorance. It's not, it's motivation. I'm 100% behind Emily in that one. The idea that, it's just a complete coincidence that it's just never come up. And if only women heard about it, suddenly you'd find a mass outpouring of empathy from women to men is so ridiculous. Women have such a strong vested interest in not hearing men's pain. Like so strong, they'll actively resist it. The conversation with a woman, a typical woman, about men's struggles is not a case of her silently nodding her head and asking questions out of curiosity and being like, this is such a fantastic opportunity to learn about men. It's an argument from the outset of men don't have that problem. Women have that problem. Women suffer. You're just trying to minimize female suffering. It's pulling teeth. It's not.
Yeah.
It's way too kind to let women collectively off the hook by saying that this is a matter of ignorance. There is a dark aspect of female psychology which has a vested interest in not understanding the men's perspective and men's pain. And until women confront their own dark side as to why am I scared to hear about this, no change is going to happen. And in the answers that Emily just gave, like, my respect just increased so much. I so enjoyed you hearing you admit to Todd just then that you'd never thought about this before. Thank you for admitting that. I also really admire the fact that what else did you say? When I asked you that empathy question, do you understand what it's like to be an invisible man? You're like, no, not really. Yeah. But you're listening, you're understanding. That's a great start. And just to really drive the point home, while I'm not expecting any woman, certainly not you, certainly not anybody, to really understand exactly what it's like in our shoes, just hear that it hurts, that it's really painful, that for a man to not feel as though he is a sexually viable person, that women don't find him attraction, is a self-esteem black hole that is so dark and so terrible and so terrifying. And as Todd alluded to, it's behind a lot of the violence, a lot of the stuff that is currently being blamed on political motivations and things like that. You can definitely draw back to this lack of being sexually desirable. You can find hateful, depressed, miserable people who spend years in therapy trying to figure out what's wrong with them, like what's going on. He starts getting laid. Suddenly all those issues just start to sort of evaporate. Turns out it's like, actually, he just needed to feel like he was a viable person, that women could find some value in him, that they wanted to sleep with him. And that can be enough to sort of start a whole self-healing process. But without that, oh boy, it's so bad. It's so bad. Now, what to do about that is a really difficult question, because I don't think that shaming women is the solution any more than shaming men is the solution. It's why so much of my channel, probably in particular my Patreon content, which is where I go into a bit more depth on this stuff, is about self-improvement, because I don't believe in a zero-sum game. I don't believe that men have to succeed at the expense of women. I think if men collectively improve their quality and their masculinity, then everybody can be a whole lot happier. And so this is the goal, essentially, is like, all right, let's just take a quick look at the culture around us, the state of psychology of everybody. Oh, it's a mess. Oh, we're all hugely traumatized. Oh, we don't understand each other. Okay, let's fix these things. Maybe instead of fighting each other and pointing the fingers, you're not doing this, men aren't doing this, women aren't doing this. That's all pointless. That's tribalism. It's a culture war. Let's take a therapeutic perspective. Let's all try and improve, get better, and then everyone might just suddenly chill out and be a lot happier, and then we can all partner up and have children and live in utopia.
Be happy.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful thought. I mean, I've definitely even made the mistake, I think, at times on my TikTok, kind of swinging the other way and really, not really like attacking women, but kind of like really highlighting the things that they're doing wrong, and that's probably contributed to me not having as many women followers, which is, it's tough, right? It's a tough pill to swallow, because I want men to be able to relate, and I want them to feel heard, but I also want to tread that line gently so that women are also listening and there's an actual impact. But
have you felt attacked? Sorry to jump in, Emily. I've said some reasonably strong things about women, in the ways that they're kind of letting us down, failing. Have you personally felt attacked in this conversation? Have you felt defensive at any point?
No, actually. No.
I mean, whatever it is, whatever it is inside you that's allowed you to not feel that way, let's see if we can get that kind of into women. So maybe, like, let me ask, like, is it a combination of, typically what I find with women like yourself, and my Patreon community has a wonderful community of women, and I so admire the fact that they take their time out to try and learn about men's issues. Like, they're such valuable allies. I love the word that Todd used there. Like, and your presence is so important. But I tend to find women like yourself, it's one of two things that have gone on. Is one, they've got positive, like, male role models to the point where they don't feel like the negative stereotypes painted about men actually match with their personal reality. They have good fathers, they have good brothers, they're married to a good man, whatever that might be. That's like a really important thing. Or two, they have felt sufficiently heard about their own female struggles that they now have that time spent. Like, if a woman, I've seen this in my own life, if I'm in a conversation with a woman and I want to talk to her about men's issues, I generally bring up women's issues first, and then I allow them to rant and rave or just explain. Sorry, I don't mean to put negative words to it, but really let loose. And suddenly 20, 30 minutes has gone by and they're like, And then I might say something like, there's actually a unique male experience that's somewhat similar to what you talked about. Can I share that? And then once they've had their say, they have that room to suddenly listen to it. What I'm worried about is that the social media algorithms make it feel as though women's issues are constantly under attack, because there's no shortage of extremist groups out there, men's groups, who completely deny that women have any kind of problems. So as long as you've got YouTube spaces, TikTok spaces, Reddit spaces, who are picking those most extreme examples of men denying women's suffering and then using it to radicalize women, they constantly feel like they're under attack. They constantly feel kind of defensive. And so therefore, there's no room for them to hear about men's issues because they feel like that would be at the expense of what they're going through. That's really frustrating. What I would like to do is just sort of change all the social media algorithms to prevent that kind of thing, and instead push forward a whole bunch of content, like, dare I say, mine, that actually shows, hey, I'm a guy who is listened. I've spent collectively thousands, maybe 10,000 hours listening to women complain about their unique women's struggles. I get it. I've heard it all. I'm not saying, but us instead. I'm saying, but us too. Can you let me in? Can we be part of that conversation?
Yeah. Yes. Well, to answer your question, I think I'm definitely in the first category. I have some very strong male role models in my life, an amazing dad and 2 older brothers. And then I also have a son. So it's like, I feel like so much of what we've talked about, especially talking about ones that you've seen in therapy that are just like not doing well, I worry more so for the future that my son is going to have. Sure. And that's always in the back of my head. So that definitely is, the motivation behind like the feeling that I get when I'm hearing about men's issues. And yes. I don't know what the answer is.
And thank you for correcting me as far as, motivation versus ignorance. And I think, honestly, Alexander, where that's coming from my perspective, I'm not being defensive. I'm just, just letting you know kind of why I feel that way, is because I'm fortunate enough to have women in my life, like Emily, that are that type of woman that are able to listen to issues. Because, for example, like when we were starting this podcast, I was very vulnerable with her about a specific issue I was dealing with, and she was very supportive, and it was something that was unexpected. And a lot of the female clients that I've had, I think that there's certain individuals that choose to be in therapy that are actually healthier than the general population. So the women that I've worked with tend to be more open-minded to hearing about different, issues. So, for example, in couples counseling, a lot of times it'll be the women who are driving the therapy and dragging the guy in there. But it's something that, I guess my blind spot is the fact that the women in my life, generally speaking, are kind of more open-minded and nurturing and supportive and so on and so forth. So, I think I'm the exception to that rule.
Well, it's a credit to you. It's a reflection of the quality of the individuals that you choose to associate with. It's certainly nothing to be ashamed of. It's an interesting intellectual distinction to make between ignorance and motivation, but I congratulate you. I actually relate. I'm the same. I spend time with individuals who go to counseling, go to therapy, who take self-responsibility. The women in my life, obviously, they support my channels. They obviously understand where I'm kind of coming from, but I am glad, even though I probably did it in stronger terms than I meant to, Todd. I certainly didn't mean to attack you or anything.
No,
but
it's fine.
is a blind spot that I have been pulled up for, and it's an important one that I think you should also be aware of as you move into the space, because if you assume that from your somewhat privileged position of being a healthy individual surrounded by healthy people is reflective of the general male experience like this, you will receive pushback from your male audience, because that's not what most men are experiencing. And just keep your ear to the ground, read the comments, listen to what a lot of guys are going through, and you'll be fine, because they also need to hear from your perspective. Like, actually, I've had success in turning women into allies. Here's how I've done it. You know what I mean? So there's got to be some give and take in that relationship.
100%. Yeah, and I do, again, with the majority of my male clients, I'm seeing that pain. And it's something that, it is so heartbreaking, because there's just not a lot of answers right now, because it's really difficult to surround yourself with healthy women, again, especially if you're invisible to them. And maybe, I think a lot of this, and I'm wondering, kind of what your perspective is, because since we've got you here on, kind of where misogyny comes from.
So much of the misogyny comes, I think, from the rejection and the demonization that men have faced for their own masculinity, and then women get blamed for that. A lot of that, I think, is legitimate, but some of it's not. As you alluded to earlier, there are lots of men who suffer under the so-called patriarchy. It doesn't matter who's the president if you're still an ugly chump who's working a dead-end kind of job. But it's a little bit more difficult to sort of blame that sort of abstraction. And so when it gets mixed with a rejection from women who either deny your pain, who don't want to see you emotionally, who demonize you for your masculinity and reject you sexually, it's quite easy to take all of those frustrations of, I am a human being, I deserve dignity, I deserve to be happy, and everything seems to be conspiring against it. Whereas whenever you can look at the grass is greener on the other side and you find women have it much easier and they're the ones often making your life more difficult, I think misogyny is a reasonably natural response. And it's important to actually understand where that comes from so that you can successfully navigate men out of that. You probably encountered that in your private practice. Like, if you've got a man who just seems to be placing all of his problems on women, like, if women weren't such bitches, then I'd be happy. It's like, all right, we've got to really unpack this nice and gently, because that's definitely not the solution. That's not the real cause of it. So we've got to find out what's going on in your life. But, you'll find on my channel, there's a certain amount of validation of what I won't call misogyny, I will call victimhood. Men hate the idea of being victims, and there's really strong evolutionary reasons for this. But in truth, what's happening to men is not fair. I'd also say what's happening to women is not fair. Like, legitimately, our species as a whole is not anywhere near our potential in terms of psychological health. We've all been let down collectively by our families and our culture. And so everybody is feeling a little bit pissed off. Unfortunately, placing the blame on the opposite gender isn't helpful, other than correctly identifying those blind spots that we can correct it. If you're ever moving to the point of, I'm not educating myself, I'm gathering data so I can complain more effectively, then you've started down the wrong track.
Yeah, I think the educational piece is key. I mean, when I first started my TikTok page, I was accused in the comments a couple of times of being a misogynist. And I researched it. I was like, holy cow, I want to make sure on my own inner self that I'm not portraying something from my trauma. So it's just having that self-reflection. I think so many people run away from that, and they just think that they should just be perfect, and it's they don't want to even allow the possibility that they could be wrong. And to then allow space to research and to do the work.
Yeah.
So much of the anger that men are expressing towards women is misplaced anger for their mothers. Yeah. It's probably the least popular talking point in the manosphere. No one wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to admit it. A lot of men idealize their mothers to a ridiculous degree. But what happens is that men have a kind of abstract, almost Joseph Campbell archetype type relationship to the feminine. And there's an expectation that they should almost be able to dive into the feminine and be nurtured and comforted and go there to be recharged with their energy. All of that is legitimate when you're 0 to 12 as a boy. Your mother should be doing that for you. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
We've been talking for a while. So what happens, unfortunately, is if a boy hasn't received proper feminine nurturing from their mother, when they turn like 11 or 12 and those hormones kick in and the sexual response comes on as strong as it is, a lot of those misplaced frustrations with their mother that they were never able to actually blame towards their mother because that was too frightening. You had to keep her happy, you know, she's the one in charge of your survival. It suddenly gets blamed kind of on women. Like, I still feel a somewhat legitimate entitlement to feminine nurturing. I didn't get it from my mother, but I have this strong sexual attraction to women. And so I want them to want me. I want them to like me. What, I'm just getting rejected all the time? Or even if a girl does find me sexually attractive and we start hooking up, the moment I want to be a little bit more emotional with her, she shuts down, she stops sleeping with me and goes after the biker, drug dealer, bad boy guy. Like, there's a frustration that comes down. There's a collective feeling like the feminine is not living up to its role. It's not providing what we as men need from the masculine. I think that what you tend to find is that men, rare as they may be, who had genuinely healthy relationships with their mother, respect women, and they have healthy relationships with women going on. Now, to what degree that's placed on men for not recognizing that women aren't surrogate mothers, there's a big case to be made for that. To what degree we should be blaming mothers for not doing a better job at parenting, there's a case to be made for that. Often those mothers had bad fathers themselves. You go back and down this line enough to simply say that the idea of finding somebody to blame isn't actually going to fix anything. The most we can do as individuals is just take empowerment and try and break that cycle. So it's why on my channel you hear me talk about stop making your girlfriend a surrogate mother a lot, because at least that's something that he's in control of. However, I would encourage men also to go back through therapy and actually grieve over the things they didn't receive from their mothers, because once they properly place that energy away from the sexual component and back to the simply emotional nurturing component, they tend to find they can have a much healthier relationship with women, and it becomes a lot less codependent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that was the thing that I was going to say that I've seen, so much in the therapeutic space, is that men grew up with women that were abusive. And primarily, there's a whole generation of men that were raised primarily by women. And so they're either abusive or neglectful. And then it's one of those things where when they grow up, they still carry that trauma inside, and they never really work it out, and then it ends up being projected onto partners and relationships and women in general.
It's always hard for me to think of like what is unhealthy and what is healthy within the relationship when it comes to expectations for like what a woman does for a man, right? So like her making his lunch, or preparing dinner, of course, or carrying the purse full of things that he might need that he hasn't like even requested, but she's, almost caring for him ahead of time like a mom would. But like, it's also, okay, yeah, maybe that's her being his quote unquote mommy, but also that's just a demonstration of a partner anticipating another partner's needs. Mm-hmm. Right? Like that second way is kind of how I think of it, that it doesn't mean that there's issues there, but he just wants her to anticipate.
It's such an important distinction. There's such a healthy amount of nurturing that should happen. Some men will overcorrect and say, oh, well, because of what Alexander said, I can't rely on my partner for anything. It's like, no, okay. Like, you can't just take this stuff in a simplistic manner. I tell you, if you fully heal the relationship or the grief that you didn't get from your mother, it will become quite obvious to you what's a normal expectation from your partner. And the best clue is to look at the degree to which you're doing things for her. So if you think about all of your masculine contribution that you're giving her in terms of the relationship, whether that's making decisions, making money, providing structure, comforting her when she's upset, being a man, whatever degree you're giving that to her, it's reasonable to expect the same amount coming back, from her to you in terms of the feminine.
Gosh, I love that advice.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Thank you so much for being here, Alexander.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Alexander. We really appreciate it. And it's something that, has been a real privilege to get the opportunity to sit down and speak with you, especially, you getting up so early to do this for us. So I again, thank you so much. I'll continue to be a subscriber and a member of your Patreon, and hopefully we can speak again in the future.
What a wonderful conversation. So thoroughly enjoyed listening to both of your perspectives. You're both very polite, very open-minded. You let me monologue, which is lovely. I wish the best of luck for your podcast. I think we need more nuanced, intelligent, rational voices in this space helping out men. And I think it's lovely, I suppose, when I see, like, Todd with your psychology degree and Emily with your popularity on TikTok, you kind of could have focused on anything. It's nice to interact with individuals who also recognize how important this is. As I look around the problems in society, there's no shortage of things that you could choose to focus on. But you know what? Relationships are really important, and men are struggling in relationships. Women are struggling in relationships. There's this crisis, and you guys have kind of chosen to put this front and center for your content. Like, that's a beautiful validation for me and everybody who watches my content or creates in the same space. If we can attract individuals like yourselves into this, it's a really important confirmation that what we're doing is important and this issue is important. And so we need more of it. I really hope that we get to chat again. So enjoyable.